Good evening. My name is Julia Ploem and I work here at the Nieuwe Liefde. And I would like to welcome you all on our behalf and on the behalf of Ten Have Publishers. And I would particularly like to welcome Matthieu Ricard and Roman Krznaric. Matthieu Ricard has long been well known in the Buddhist community in the Netherlands, but he has also been familiar to a wider audience since the publication in the late 90s of The Monk and the Philosopher, which he co-authored with his father, the philosopher Jean-François Revel. After a brief career as a microbiologist at the renowned Institut Pasteur in Paris, Ricard changed the course of his life in 1972. After completing his thesis, he became a Buddhist monk for good. Yet he never lost his interest in science, far from it. He has long been closely involved in the Mind and Life Institute, an organization associated with the Dalai Lama, which investigates the workings of the mind by bringing together insights from Western science and Buddhism. Ricard himself has also been used as an object of scientific research by allowing his brain to be tested by neuroscientists at the University of Wisconsin a few years ago. The scans revealed that Ricard has an, and I quote, abnormally large capacity for joy and a reduced propensity towards negativity. So, based on these findings, the researchers concluded he really is the happiest man in the world. We are gathered here today to celebrate the publication of the Dutch translation of Plaidoyer pour l'Altruïsme, an almost encyclopedic work in which Ricard draws from numerous scientific disciplines to demonstrate that man is deeply inclined to good. He will shortly tell you more about this himself. Then, in order to structure the dialogue between Eastern and Western wisdom this evening, the School of Life founder, thinker and author Roman Krznaric will pose a number of questions to Matthieu Ricard. Krznaric recently wrote a book about a related topic called Empathie. Perhaps some of you already know him from his appearance on Brands met Boeken on November the 1st, or last week on the Flemish television program Het Voordeel van de Twijfel. But we will start the evening with music, played by pianist Wijnand van Klaveren. After that, Mr. Ricard will give his lecture, followed by the interview. Enjoy your evening.
So thank you so much. I think it would be so much better if we just sat and listened whole night to the music. I'm sorry you have to cope now with the Buddhist monk with a French Indian accent. So, yes. Oh, sorry. So I think this man is maybe a symbol of different kinds of challenges that we are facing in our lives. That could be very personal challenges, within ourselves, since our mind can be our best friends and our worst enemy, and we have to deal with our mind from morning till evening. And the mind is the final experiencer of every situation. In the end, it is the mind that translates outer circumstances in happiness or misery. So if we do change the way our mind works, it actually changed our world, which is the world we perceive. Of course, those can be also facing stark difficulties, poverty in the midst of plenty. We speak of the third world, but this is called the fourth world. In the midst of plenty, you get poverty. And that's something that we see increasingly as inequalities increase in the world. But then there is also, as you saw here, this person at the edge of the precipice. So it's a personal challenge, it could be a societal challenge, but then there is a kind of brand new challenge that has taken us completely by surprise, that we didn't plan, that none of us feel actually responsible. Is that if you think at 10,000 years ago, there was between 1 to 5 million human beings on Earth. And when they started to settle and start agriculture and domesticate animals and hoarding goods and some kind of hierarchy with chiefs and others started, and then conflicts to appropriate the wealth began. Some wars started about 10,000 years ago. Still, what they could do to the environment, the resilience of the earth will soon heal those wounds. It was minor, and it was so till the industrial age. But now, for the first time in our history, since the great acceleration of 1950, we are now having, the human population, the major impact onto the earth, to such extent that now we move into a new, almost geological era called the Anthropocene. The age of the human becomes the major factor to influence the future of the environment. That has taken us by surprise, because it came gradually. Nobody decided that. A friend of mine who is an environmentalist said, what a pity that CO2 is not pink. If we knew that the sky is becoming pinker every day, we'll start worrying a little bit. So imagine now that it is quite clear, and then that there's some kind of limit there, yes, isn't it? So there was an ex-president of a North African country, I won't name him. He said, a long time ago, he said, 5 years ago we were at the edge of the precipice, now we made a big step forward. So the idea of unlimited growth, unlimited increase of using natural resources is saying exactly the same thing. We are at the edge of the precipice, let's still make a big step forward. We don't have 3, 5 planet Earth. If just today there would be as many cars per inhabitant in China as in North America, the whole resources of oil will have to go to China. So it's just impossible. So now, there are also more than that. If we keep on just acting like that on the biosphere, there are moments, just like here, as we can imagine, there's a discontinuity between here and here. Tipping points. And imagine that you're working in the dark, coming closer and closer to what you hear the noise of the waterfall. At some point you say, okay, now I don't know how close it is. I just need to slow down. I'm no more in the zone of safety. So this has been defined by environmentalists as what we call planetary boundaries. We are at the unique age of climate stability, 1,000 years. And humanity could continue to prosper in the same way in another 50,000 years if we don't mess it up in a big way. And so the scientists have defined, and they just published an update about 10 days ago. They defined a number of factors, which I'm not going to detail here, which altogether, we stay within a certain dimension of those factors, continue to prosper. The climate can remain pretty stable. And the whole equilibrium of the biodiversity can be maintained. So in the 1900s, there was, even though the industrial age had started, it was still not that threatening at all. We were well within the limits. In 1950, at the time of the Great Acceleration, you can see some of those are looming quite strongly. And then, I don't have the paper, the recent paper just a few days ago, but now imagine 2010. And this, so what will be the next slide? And look at this. We vastly overrun 4 of those limits. And just to give you one example, biodiversity. At the current rate of losing species every year, we will have lost 30% of all species on Earth. And it's not just rhinoceros and tigers, and it's so many kinds of reptiles, insects, and so forth that contribute to that biodiversity and make the whole system function harmoniously. They will be gone forever. Even you freeze their DNA in some fridge, it's just not possible to come back. Tipping point. Irreversible change. So therefore, this is not something that we can dispense of. So here I'm sitting in front of a 7,000 glacier in Bhutan. 2,000 of those glaciers are melting in the Himalayas. It's the 3rd pole. They melt faster than the North Pole because there's some dust that settles on the ice. There are many lakes that didn't exist, don't have names because they didn't exist 30 years ago. And when they will flow down in the valley, big catastrophes. So, what does this to do with altruism, you might say? Why this guy is talking suddenly about environment? Well, the question of the environment is very complex scientifically, even though there's a 99.5% of all scientists agree on that, but there's still a lot of complex issues. Politically, of course. Politicians don't like to decide on the long term. Unpopular measure that they would need to take to avert those big catastrophes. They speak of immigration now, but when you will have 200 million of climate refugees, Lampedusa will be nothing compared to that in terms of suffering. And then economically, we know it's going to cost 20 times more to pay the bill for the catastrophe, but it's not the same people that if we do something now. So then in the end, it is exactly a question of altruism versus selfishness. If you don't care, said, why should I care for future generations? What did they do for me? If you go like that, just go for it, forget it. You won't be there. You can burn your house, everything. But, so in the end, do you care or not? Now, imagine that tonight, we, a small group of people, decide today of the fate of the 7 billion beings on Earth today. There will be a huge uproar. How can you dare deciding for us, our future? But we now, the 7 billion people, are exactly doing the same things for billions and billions and billions of human beings that will exist. Some philosophers say they don't have rights because they don't exist. You have to claim your rights, reciprocate, all this stuff. But we know for sure one thing, that they will not want to suffer. So there's a kind of intrinsic right not to suffer, basically, especially if we knowingly do that. So this is the challenge. And here's the great acceleration. You know, anything you take, there's about 20 of those graphs. I'll just show you a few. You see that it's exponentially increasing, not even linearly, exponentially increasing from 1950. Loss of rainforest, biodiversity loss, water use, pollution of coastal waters, you know, all these things increasing, the methane. And methane is quite interesting because it's mostly produced by livestock that for meat consumption. And the overall chain of livestock, from deforestation, shipping grain to the rich country to grow those cattle and make the meat industry, the gas from the cattle, and so forth, is the second cause of greenhouse gas effect after the housing and before transportation. 14%, 14.5%. And it's a typical case because it's bad for everybody. It's bad for the animals. 100 billion land animals, 1,000 billion sea animals every year killed for our use. Then it's bad for inequalities. We ship 750 million tons of grain from South America and Africa to rich countries to produce meat. Then it's not even human health. Big studies have shown that if you eat meat 5 times a week, it increased 15% your risk of cardiovascular disease and cancer. And you can see that a US citizen consume 120 kilos of meat per year, while in India it's only 3, and Africa 7 or 5. So it's disproportionate. So everybody's losing. So that can't we have a little more consideration for others? And look at those, 70,000 chicken look after by 10 people, those big factories, and all the use we do. Where is the humanity in all that? Keeping bears for bile. So why? So is it really because man is a wolf for man? Is it that hopeless? It doesn't seem that everybody is a wolf for man. Is it, as Freud was saying, they have discovered very little good in humans? From what I know, most of them are rascals. That's a good start in life, isn't it? So if you start with this idea, just go for it. Again, it doesn't look too bad. I know this guy, he's not quite rascal. And then, there's this, we can see, it doesn't make evening news, but people, this joy of cooperating together. Everybody who has seen people cooperating know that they're just together, it's very joyful, they gather at night, they make feast, and then next year, if it's your house, they'll all come. That's what makes, a real sort of lively community, and not only human beings, by the way. Then, of course, there's a struggle for life. Survival of the fittest, losers and winners. But the good news is that, yes, of course, competition exists, and it has been a major factor in evolution. We don't need to prove that. We don't need to prove selfishness. We don't need to prove competition. But it turns out, and it's a very fascinating new branch of evolution, new vision, is that cooperation has been actually much more creative in bringing increasing step of complexity in evolution, from monocellular cells to multicellular cells. And all this kind of increased complexity came to some kind of cooperation. It's not the kind of cooperation with a motivation in the beginning, but it's still cooperation rather than excluding each other, being in competition with each other. And that's, of course, at the core of human relationship. There was a OCDE opinion poll in the OCDE countries about they're proposing 12 factors that matters most for happiness and flourishing, like income and all this stuff. Number 1 was the quality of human relationship, the people reply. So that's what matters so much. Again, not only human beings. And then there's one of the 5 hotspots for longevity in Japan, where people have the most centenaries. One of the characteristics of these villages is that they are together from birth to death. They're always together, they make feasts together, the grandmothers come at the end of the schools to welcome the children, even they don't have their own grandchildren there. They live, they're born, they live and die all together. And they say that's why we are sort of well, that's why we are this kind of longevity. And researchers sort of confirm that. That's the single most important difference. Now, sorry, let me come back. Okay, so it seems that there is something that is, we have this tendency to be together, to sort of bond together, the importance of, the quality of social relationship give you a better longevity, better health, less drug abuse, and all kinds of good things. But let's pause for a bit. So we can say that man is a wolf for man, just declare that we're all rascals. But first of all, it's just like kind of a priori vision of humanity. Is it based on any science? Is it based on a sound logic? So first of all, there is no a single sociological study, psychological study that proves universal selfishness, that scratch at the surface of an altruist and it's the selfish that will bleed. That means if you go deep within, you will find some kind of nasty self-interested motives. And it's quite true that there are fake, there are behavior that are beneficial to others, like I give you something, but the motivation is calculating for more in return or to show a good image of yourself, all kinds of self-interested motives. That's quite true. But is it really that every single motive is such? So there are people who are determined to try to find something. We'll say, for instance, if someone gives an anonymous gift for saving someone's life or children's life, and then they will tell you, oh, I felt so good about that. I say, oh, you did that just because you feel good. You did that for the warm glow. It's selfish. Then what happens? For instance, look at this and at this. So saving someone from the train. And there are many examples like that. So do you think that this guy, when he's doing that, is thinking, I'm going to feel so good when this is over? It's so stupid. But then you ask them, interview, it said, oh, I could not do this. I just didn't think. I jumped and did something. Aha. You didn't think. You just acted like automatic behavior. That's not selfish. That's not altruistic. That's automatic behavior. So you cannot say it's altruistic. So I discussed that with Daniel Batson, who is one of the leading psychologists who are specialists on altruism, and we really clearly agreed that of course there is a decision, there's a choice, but the choice is so obvious that you don't have to ponder for half an hour. That comes out of what you are. So this guy is not going to think for half an hour, should I stretch my hand or not? No, he's going to do it. Because that's so obvious. Unless you are a psychopath, unless it's someone from another ethnic and you are committing, you might leave that kid drowning, but otherwise, you don't have to think for half an hour. So, and animals do that too. Now, this guy, he clearly has a choice, no question. No, it's not easy, but he's still holding firm. And then there is bigger choice, like the pastor André Trogme and his wife Magda. For years, under the threat of the Gestapo, the threat of the Vichy government, they have hidden more than 3,500 Jewish refugees who were knocking at their door in the winter. They would hide them. The whole village was conspiring to hide them, bringing them to Switzerland from this village in France. They absolutely not negotiable. They will never close their door to anybody. There was a threat on their lives, on the life of their family. They just did it. And it's a long time. There's a long-term sort of difficulty to do that. So it'd be very hard to sort of, say, maybe there is selfish motive and all that. At some point, as this person says, goodness leaves us gasping, for we refuse to recognize as a natural human attribute. We say those are saints, it's not for us. But maybe there's a banality of goodness. The whole village, they were not all saints and they didn't start as saints, they just did it. It was natural. So let's not search for mysterious explanation of goodness in others, but rather rediscover the mystery of goodness in ourselves. We have this potential. And we know that somehow deep within, there's a moment of unconditional love for a child, for someone. Why can we take that, nurture that, expand that, let it fill our mental landscape, and then expand that to others? Anyone who don't want to suffer, why not extending that benevolence to that person? It's not like a limited good, a limited resources, like a piece of chocolate cake that you can only give 10 pieces and you have to choose only to my kids or something. It's an attitude. It doesn't cost more to have this open attitude of loving attitude to all than just to a few. It's like the sun, it shines on everything. It doesn't cost him more to shine on just a few or on the whole earth. And there are people in your life that are closer to you, they get more warm, but because of the circumstances, not because you narrow down the beams of the light. And empathy is so much present in our life. Look at this person. He lost his leg when he was 5, and all his life he has been taking care of people in suffering. So we feel this strong wish to help others. And we are touched deeply to the extent that maybe we'll talk later about that. If you just keep on resonating with the images of suffering, and if you meet them in your own life, then at some point, if it's only that resonance, you become overwhelmed. The impact it has on you caused empathic distress, and then you want to somehow distance yourself, or you burn out. But there's another way to bring this very constructive, positive attitude of loving kindness. Is the antidote, actually, to this empathic distress. It boosts your courage. The more suffering, the more determination to remedy to that, and you don't suffer. 60% it was a study done in North America, of all people involved in healthcare, nurses, doctors, have or will have a period of burnout in their life, in their career. But also there are people who naturally are more sort of loving, kind, spontaneous, and they don't burn out. So the actual, and I think we'll speak again with Roman, is that to sort of soak this perception of the suffering in others with this very sort of warm-heartedness and loving kindness. This was given to us by evolution through maternal care, parental care. But on the basis of that was given by evolution, we can extend that to others. Like perceive every child somehow as a child that needs our help. And it's not only for human beings again. This whole idea that we're only one who have emotions, only one who can care, this is such a silly idea. So now, the question is, and I cannot go into much detail in a short time, but there are plenty of good studies, like by Daniel Batson and others, showing in very controlled condition in the laboratory that if you try to explain certain behavior systematically by a selfish explanation, he made very interesting situations where people could have an easy escape, for instance. But after 20 years of those investigations, all the selfish explanation for the fact that 30 to 40% of people do help, go out of their way, even they have a chance to escape, even they could choose many other solutions, they do something with the motivation to help others. And so altruism is not just a behavior, because a behavior could be, as I mentioned, beneficial, but with a selfish motive. Altruism is an intention, a motivation that aims at accomplishing the good of others. Now, if that altruism encounters suffering, then it becomes compassion. It's just a question of definition, which is the same thing applied to suffering, and it becomes, instead of just wishing good, it becomes, may this person be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. And what tells you the person is suffering is this empathic resonance or this perspective taking that, oh, this person is suffering. Therefore, if I value this person, I should have concern for her condition. So the question is, and again I cannot go enough in detail, it's pretty strong case that yes, we are selfish quite often, but also we can be genuinely altruistic. It's not a question of saying we are 100% altruist, human beings are nothing but altruist. That's, of course, it's not the case. But if there is genuine altruism, that sometimes in our mind, all what we want at this point toward that person is the good of that person. That's altruism. If that is the case, then we can try to enhance that. That's the notion of cultivating genuine qualities like altruism. Cultivating, we do that all the time. You did that for years and years. If I sit there without having learned, I cannot pretend playing the piano. I'm afraid it would be terrible. But you went through all this rigorous training for achieving that. And we all accept that. We will not achieve that without this discipline, this passion, this enthusiasm, and seeing slowly the benefit coming up. By what kind of mystery when it comes not to sport, not to mathematics, but to inner qualities, they would be either unchanging, like engraved in stone, or right at the top from the beginning. That makes no sense. There will be the only skills that don't need to be cultivated, or that cannot be modified. It's exactly the same. Simply, instead of applying to physical or something that's mixed physical with inside, or learning to read and write, it is about learning to be more compassionate, to be kinder, to be more attentive, not just mindful, but caring and mindful at the same time. Now, there's a lot of spoken this mindfulness. Of course, if you're properly mindful, you will know what brings suffering, what brings happiness, and you're bound to be kind. But the risk is that it's taken too literally, just be mindful. Well, you could have a very mindful sniper and mindful psychopath. It's true. No, the sniper needs to be so focused, so concentrated, never distracted, very calm. Always bring back his attention in the present moment. Non-judgmental, just kill people, no judgment. That could happen. So I talked a lot with John Kabat-Zinn. I said, please just add five letters, caring mindfulness. So simple. You cannot have a caring sniper and a caring psychopath. And there's a study done recently by Tanya Singer, with whom I work a lot at the Max Planck Institute of Leipzig. She took 300 people for 1 year to distinguish empathy, perspective taking, compassion, and mindfulness. And 3 months in different orders. She found systematically that mindfulness is great, but it doesn't increase at all your prosocial behavior. It just makes you more mindful and you can deal with your stress. Perspective taking a little bit, but if you practice metta, loving kindness, huge increase in prosocial behavior. So this is a wonderful study, with 300 subjects. It's got about 10 to 15 papers going to be published soon. And I think that's a very interesting insight. So anyway, so the point is, can we cultivate it? So contemplative tradition of disciple of this is my first teacher, Kangyu Rinpoche, and before was Khyentse Rinpoche. I spent 25 years with those two teachers when they were alive. And then here's the Dalai Lama meeting with scientists, Richard Davidson, with whom I worked a lot. And here you are with 256 electrodes, because now the contemplative tradition of training the mind, because that's the real meaning of meditation, cultivating, becoming familiar with qualities, now can be, the technology is good enough that you can see the corresponding changes in the brain. If it could not see, then too bad, we still know that it works, but maybe the technology is not there, but the technology is there. And both with electroencephalogram, and this is Mingyur Rinpoche, who said that MRI has 4 characteristics. It's narrow, it's dark, it's noisy, and it is, what else? It is cold. But still you have to meditate, not like that. So here, the first time I went, 2.5 hours in an MRI machine just coming out. So Richard Davidson is relieved that I'm still alive. And just very briefly, here is untrained practitioners. They did for a week some loving kindness and compassion meditation. Here at rest, nothing happened. Here in meditation, nothing happened. Because they are not trained, you can't blame them. Here is, people who did 10,000 to 60,000 hours of meditation at rest, they rest. That's what you ask them to do. When they engage in meditation, you can see this is compassion meditation, this huge increase in the gamma frequencies. This is based on that a very kind British journalist, independent, suddenly declared that there was somebody the happiest person in the world. No scientist will ever dare to say such a joke. And by the way, all the 20 long-term meditators who went through that, there's exactly the same result. It's not about an individual, it's about the training. Now, if you look, the same thing with brain imagery, here's meditators at rest, and when they engage in compassion meditation, several areas connected with sense of affiliation, parental love, also empathy, of course, positive emotions are activated. At rest, the novices, nothing happened at rest, nothing happened in meditation. So training does make a difference. Now, you say, okay, 60,000 hours, 25 years, that's a bit too much. Here, 4 weeks of caring mindfulness, not just mindfulness. It changed the brain structurally. You see, hippocampus, that's the area of the brain that assimilates novelty, is in only 4 weeks is physically increased compared to a control group. So that's kind of neat. It's changed functionally, changed structurally. Now, does it translate in prosocial behavior? The answer is yes. If you look at people who did 20 minutes, only 15 days of compassion meditation, and you look at their behavior in different ways, and then you compare that with a very nice intervention of cognitive reappraisal. If someone is nasty, you say maybe because he has a bad problem with his family, maybe he's sick, and so that's why. So it works, but it doesn't work as good as compassion meditation to promote prosocial behavior. Now you would say, well, can we start with kids? Answer is yes. Richard Davidson is doing a 10 weeks intervention in preschoolers, 4 or 5 years old. So how can it change anything? 20 minutes, 3 times a week, not much. And they do this breathing, mindful breathing with a stone. They do gratitude. They do cooperative learning. They plant seeds together. They try to see the emotions of others. If one is sad, the other one says, how do you think your friend is feeling? And they say, oh, he's feeling something here. How do you feel? I feel sad too. So all these things, the kids love it. And you say, well, it's not going to make any difference. Well, it does. After 10 weeks, you see the prosocial behavior evaluated by the scientists and the teachers means less conflict, easier reconciliation, and so forth and so forth. But that maybe not enough. Now comes the ultimate test, the stickers test. That's the test that doesn't lie. So before the intervention, you give a number of stickers to the kid and you say you have to give them away. You can give to your best friend, there's a photo on the envelope, the kids that you cannot stand in the class, an unknown child, and a sick child, and you have to give the stickers. So guess what happens before the intervention? Everything goes to their best friend. 10 weeks, of 20 minutes, 3 times a day, you say, is it going to make a difference? Big difference. Not only big difference, you level down the in-group, out-group. This is best friend and less favorite child. Those differences are not statistically significant. You just blurred the in-group, out-group discrimination. What best can you wish for 4 or 5 years old to prepare them in life when we know the deleterious effect of discrimination in society? So when the Dalai Lama heard that in Madison, he said, good, now you did 10 school, you do 100 school, 1,000 school, go to the UN, the whole world. And we do that in India. We have 25,000 kids in our Karuna sort of humanitarian works, and we teach them yoga and meditation, and they just love it. And there's increased even school, there's less school absent, how do you call, not coming to school. They love that, and the parents are very happy too. Now, there's also good news. You would think maybe that violence is all over the media, we can't walk in the street anymore. Well, the good news is you have 100 less chance to die today of murder than 400 years ago. 100 times less. Never been so safe. Look, this is a logarithmic scale. 1, 10,000. It went down 50 times, 100 times, except it's 12. Nobody knows why. The violence toward children has cut by half in 20 years in the United States. It's still domestic violence is the main cause of violence in the world, but it has come down. Abolition of torture. Before you torture people on the public place on Sunday afternoon, you could see people being hanged, being put on the wheel and beaten down. It was, you go to see that instead of football matches. Now you don't do that anymore. Number of casualties per conflict in average. There's terrible things in Syria, Sudan, but after Second World War, it was 60,000 victims per average conflict. Now it's 1,000 throughout the world. If you take in fact, all this come from the Steven Pinker's book on decline of violence. So now also you need to put compassion in action. It's just fine to speak about compassion, meditate on compassion, but compassion without action is sterile. But compassion is also blind. So that's what we try to do, just to tell you. Also, one of the reasons I'm still running around the world like a headless chicken, pretending to be the happiest person in the world, is to also that we can treat 200,000 patients a year in our clinics in Nepal. This is a palliative care unit. In India and Tibet. We run in 190 villages in Bihar. We have a lot of dispensaries in Tibet. We build school with bamboos for 2,000 kids in 3 months for 100,000 euros. Hard to beat. Here's one of the 25 dispensaries or clinic we did in Tibet, in nomad areas. We need a bridge. So we built 18 bridges over the year. That's our car, by the way. So the driver is reciting his mantra very fast. And home for the elderly is the happiest woman in the world, by the way. She got recognized by great scientists. Schools, we try to educate girls especially. We intervene in the earthquake areas, sort of taking care of 3,000 people over 2 winters. We bought 6 trucks of goods. We are building earthquake resistance school this year at 4,000 meters high, and then just nothing to do with the rest of what I've said. It's just some nice images of the place where we work. Photographers can't resist showing their thing, So there's kind of Euronews, no comments. It's a Karuna girl. And then I found her 12 years later. And she's called Beautiful Ocean of Turquoise. Now, okay, what we do. This is what I see at breakfast from my hermitage, by the way. So we need enhancing cooperation. We need to move to another level of cooperation. We need cooperative learning. We need cooperation within enterprise. Maybe the competition between so that customers keep happy. But we are all on the same boat. Martin Luther King said we came on different vessels. We are all on the same boat. We have to cooperate. That's the absolute need. We need not more, even sustainable growth is very suspicious because there's a mixture of growth. Will grow, quantitatively. Sustainable harmony means what? Now, realities in the midst of plenty. So that's more harmonious society, social justice. In the long term, maintaining the environment for the sake of future generations, sustaining harmonious balance in the biosphere. So no more growth. It's only qualitative growth. No more quantitative growth is not sustainable at all. We need a caring economics. There's two things that classic economics of maximizing personal preferences cannot do. It cannot remedy to poverty in the midst of plenty. You have no interest to take those Bangladeshi out of poverty because you get cheap labor. It doesn't maximize your personal interest. Second thing, classic economics, where they say that there's no place for altruism in it, cannot take care of common goods, the quality of the air, of the ocean, democracy, fighting for justice. That it doesn't maximize my personal interest. It maximizes the interest of everyone. So we need a caring economics. If you tell economists you have to introduce compassion, altruism, they say, it's very nice, but this is not my job. But they can't say, I don't care. I don't care for poor, I don't care for the future generation. So that's a good word. Local commitment, we should all try to do our best thing, and global responsibility. We have the WHO for health and everything. We need the same thing for the environment. It's no more a question of local interest, national interest. I was struck recently at Davos Economic Forum when I met Johan Rockström, who's the main scientist who defined those planetary boundaries. He was showing the risk of having, say, 6 degrees by end of the century, 4 degrees or 2 degrees. He said the risk of having 6 degrees is 1.8%. I thought, that's not going to work. Who will care for 1.8% risk of 6 degrees? He said, this is a very high risk. It's like having 1,700 plane crash every day. Because 1.8% is one plane out of 60 will crash. So this huge risk. And the 4 degree, which will be 3 meters higher ocean, I'm sorry for Holland, is 7% risk. One plane out of 12 crashings risk. Who will take a plane? If I will be dead long time ago for sure. So that shows that we cannot wait, and that shows that altruism is the only concept, and I want to end on that. When you have economists speaking to environmentalists, some speak about the end of the year accounts or 5 years investment. 50 years, 100 years means nothing for them. It's just not their job. And environmentalists, they get depressed because they know what's happening, but nobody sort of wants to do something. And then people who take care of growth and happiness, 10 years, 20 years, a lifetime, they're also a bit depressed because it always takes second importance compared to now, the solid reality of now. But if you want a common ground to answer the challenges of our modern times, what other pragmatic, realistic concept, other than having more consideration for others, can answer that? There's no other one. If you have more consideration for others, this financial world will be at the service of society and not society at the service of the finance. So it's caring economics. If you have more consideration for others, you will make sure that everyone in life can flourish, can fulfill their aspiration, can raise their kids, can have a roof, minimum to survive in freedom, at peace. So gross national happiness. If a country is the most powerful and the richest, but everyone is unhappy, what's the point? And if you have more consideration for others, you are not going to squander the future generations and also the fate of all the biosphere. So it is the concept that allows all of those actors to speak together and find together the right solution. So you need to enhance this again. You need to extend altruism to 1.6 other million species. Why do we think that everything is just there as instrument for our consumption? The whole world is just for us. Then imagine these billions of exoplanets and galaxies. What a waste! They are useless. They are not used for us. Why are they there? Because we can't use them. So let's not think like that. Let's think us as part of this interdependent, that we need this harmony for that, and for that we need to care also for this species. So, in case of animals, I think a very good starting point is animals are my friends, and I don't eat my friends. That's George Bernard Shaw. And finally, so I think we should really decide, as Martin Luther King said, every man must decide whether he will be walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. So we have two possibilities. We are at the crossroad. This is our choice. So let's make the choice that the Dalai Lama made by saying that good heart, that's my religion. So I'm very inspired by his words. So thank you for your attention. Are you playing? Thank you. I don't know how I could not see the watch.
Oh, I'm rolling away. Is my microphone on? Well, thank you for that wonderful presentation of music, and thank you for your wonderful presentation of ideas. And I think Matthieu's new book on altruism is particularly important because for me, it's the great 21st century encyclopedia of the cooperative self. It's the first book which brings together, I think, psychological thought, scientific thought in all its areas, spiritual thought, and brings them to bear on two important things, which is both personal change and global change. As you said in your talk there, we're in the Anthropocene now, both as individuals and as a society, and altruism, as you argue in this book, seems to be our way through it. And what struck me, reading this book, really interesting, I thought, isn't this a bit kind of weird or interesting that you called this book altruism? Because altruism is a concept invented by the 19th century French Auguste Comte, about having concern for others, the opposite of egoism. And I thought, what's this French Buddhist monk doing, writing about altruism and really, not putting compassion, for example, as the key concept? And in your TED talk on altruism, I noticed you almost didn't mention the word compassion at all.
I didn't.
And I thought, and even just then, I was listening, I was counting. And so I was wondering what's going on.
It's
the choice of
quite
concept.
simple.
Yeah.
Actually, in English, the book will be called Altruism again, but with the subtitle, The Power of Compassion to Change the World, Yourself and the World. In French, compassion really means pity. And I was actually surprised, because I didn't expect, coming from a Buddhist background and speaking a lot of English, I had a photography book, and I called that Regard de compassion, a compassionate. In my mind, it was the compassionate way that the people I was photographing were looking at the world and at each other. But they all thought that I was having pity on the Tibetans, even my publisher. So I realized that compassion, you feel compassionate for someone, which is also the Latin root of suffering with, and it's pity. So it's far from what the Buddhist means, and as I mentioned briefly, and also what neuroscientists mean in English. And in English, compassion is much better. And I was even told when I went with my publisher to see different publishers in the States, there was two ladies, very sort of factual, and they said, no, here in North America, I think only 1/3 of people know what altruism means. I was really shocked. But then I told that to Daniel Batson, who is the world specialist. He says, yes, even within psychologists. So it is true that it's another of those heavy words. But the book is really about that. So in English, I think I almost call it the power of compassion and all that. But since the subject is still, I thought to keep the altruism.
Because I was wondering if you were actually trying to create a bridge between sort of secular ethics and...
No, in all our study on neuroscience, we do speak of compassion mostly. And also I think since we need different concepts, why not keeping compassion in what many neuroscientists and the Buddhists say, which is compassion is altruistic love, what altruistic love becomes when it meets with suffering. You need a special way for altruism to manifest. In general, the most fundamental thing is benevolence to others. You wish good to others. So when you wish good to someone who seems to be suffering, and that's also tricky with Buddhism, because even they don't seem to be suffering, as long as there's ignorance, suffering is brawling under, ready to explode. So it's very, a teacher, Buddhist teacher, a friend of mine, one of my teachers said, he told to a Western group, what you call happiness here, we call it suffering. Power, fame, glory, going to a nice picnic, and have all these things just end up changing and so forth. So, in that sense, compassion is for everything. But in ordinary sense, I see you happy, smiling, sitting here. I wish you good. Now, if you suffer, we need a word to say what it means to wish that this suffering and the cause of suffering be relieved. So in Buddhism, and I think now neuroscientists use compassion for that. And what we discussed is that for us, empathy, I know you wrote a wonderful book on empathy, and it's a word that is used more and more in society. But I think, since again, we need words reflect some ideas, I would argue, and I know I would like to hear what you have to say about that, that empathy is very, very crucial quality and indispensable for knowing the condition of the others. So you could do that in two ways. Either you have emotional empathy, which is what we call affective resonance, that if you are joyful, I feel joyful, if you suffer, I suffer. And then Tanya Singer, she showed in the brain that you actually really suffer. It's not just that you sort of a little bit disturbed. You actually, same areas of the brain. Now, the problem is, if you just have that at your disposal, stand-alone empathy, if you keep on suffering, especially if you are a caregiver, social worker, or nurse, if you suffer day after day after day after day of the suffering of the other, it's too much. You can't ask that of someone. If only that resources that you have, then you burn out. Or, no, you should know to protect yourself, distance yourself. What do you want to distance from someone who is suffering? Or you do something. Or you see very, very warm nurses who just didn't to do that, and people feel that and they don't burn out. So isn't it because they have this other dimension, much vaster sphere, that it's like the electric pump without water, it's just empathy, it burns. But if you feel the water of love and compassion, it doesn't burn. So the idea is, because we need to cultivate those, if we mix all the words, I mean, at least they might have different definitions, but we have to have working definitions. It happens that in the brain you have different circuit networks for empathy and for compassion. So in that sense, it is useful. But of course, you know, Darwin and Adam Smith use sympathy. So there's all these words. You just have to know what you're talking about. Yeah. So what is your sort of main approach? No. Because he wrote a wonderful book on empathy, yeah. And I'm sure he means more. So the other one is perspective taking.
Yes. So,
okay, please.
Well, I was just going to say something about that. Maybe I'll just tell you a story about my children, actually.
Yes.
So I have twins. And when they're now 6 years old, but when they're around 1.5, you get a very common situation like this, where my son would be crying, and his sister would try and comfort him with her favorite toy dog, yes. Which was a kind and sympathetic gesture, but not much use to him at all, right? A year, when they're about 2.5, and their perspective-taking empathy had kicked in, when my son was crying, his sister would go and comfort him with his favorite toy cat, okay? And what that tells you is something about this second kind of empathy. So on the one hand, you've got the affective empathy, where you share someone's emotions, I feel your pain. And the other hand, you've got what's called this perspective-taking or cognitive empathy, where you really try and imagine, what is it like to be the other person? What's it like to understand their feelings and needs? And it seems to me that this perspective-taking empathy is absolutely essential for having an appropriate response to other people. Yes. There in the case of my children, yes. Or we hear that there's an earthquake in China and people want to send teddy bears. Well, maybe people don't need teddy bears, they need trauma counseling. Yes. And what I noticed in your book was that early in your book you talked about empathy in relation to empathic distress and seemed to focus on affective empathy. But actually the rest of the book talked about empathy in a much more positive way, to focus more on this understanding yes. other people's needs, stepping in their shoes. Sure. So I'm just wondering whether actually maybe we're in the same position here, and maybe just say one more thing, that is a big issue. It's a big issue. You see it in doctors, humanitarian aid workers. But what we find amongst great doctors is they see the anxiety of their patient. They don't just feel the anxiety, that affective empathy. They try and step back a bit, have a slightly more impartial cognitive empathy, where they don't try and just feel the anxiety, they try and understand it, and then try and respond appropriately.
Yes. I fully agree with you. I mean, this is we should not also limit too much the virtue of empathy, because if you don't have empathy, I mean, there's none of the other ones will work, because you don't appreciate. One drama of humanity, Kafka said, war is a prodigious lack of imagination. And same for animals. I was telling in my book, when my grandmother took me fishing, I thought, good grandmothers go fishing, why should I not go fishing? The idea of putting myself, what will happen to me if I was dragged with a hook in the water and suffocate in the water like the fish will suffocate in the air? I never thought. So Kafka said it's a lack of imagination, prodigious lack of imagination. So it's crucial. Yeah. But like Dan Batson, for instance, he has the taxonomy of 8 different kinds of empathy, all the very subtle differences. And he says that only one that actually triggers for sure altruism is what he called empathic concern. Because you could have all that perspective taking, and then you can stand it and you just out of my way. So it's not guaranteed that it will lead to an altruistic behavior. But although it's crucial to have it, but on its own, it's not sure. Empathic concern has come with 2 things. Why would you be concerned by someone? Because you value the condition of someone. Just like me, I don't want to suffer, so I'm my suffering and happiness. Because I value the fact that I prefer to be happy than suffering the whole day long. So if I do value others and not as an instrument to my own self-interest, but I value others in themselves, then what is that person's condition? So empathy as a resonance, empathy as perspective taking will lead to doing something. So you need the intention, motivation aspect is not, I think, in empathy. You could have this perspective taking without having the motivation to help. You need that extra drive to make you actually try the best you can do something to bring happiness or remove suffering.
I mean, I kind of like the way Daniel Goleman says it, that without empathy we're emotionally tone deaf. That it's kind of a bit like music.
Yes, well, psychopaths are well known to have no empathic resonance in emotional. So, there was one psychopath who used to kill grandmothers. He would lure them in the park, say, I'm going to come to repair you, fix your bathroom, and he would just kill them. And when he was caught, he says, what's the problem? Some people like to go to movie, I like to kill grandmothers. No, he didn't see that as a problem.
Absolutely. And
but now psychopaths, there's also the issue that if you don't have the benevolence, psychopaths are extremely good at theory of mind.
That's right. They know what you think and want to play with it.
Unbelievable calculators. They are charming. They are all these things, just to screw you up and take full advantage with no qualms at all. They have no value to you, others. One of the world specialists of dealing with psychopaths said they don't make a difference between a human being and a Kleenex. It's just something to use, disposable.
I saw an interesting statistic recently saying that there are 4 times as many psychopaths at the top levels of corporations than lower down. And in fact, that raises a question for me, a wider political question about the power of altruism, which is, some people might say you're a bit idealistic about altruism, a bit utopian in a world of skullduggerous, nasty, corporate domination, social structures so entrenched with poverty and inequality. You talk about Thomas Piketty in your book. How can altruism really challenge those deep structures of society which seem so unequal? And even maybe further than that, some people might say, well, altruism based on compassion maybe doesn't have the political power to create radical social movements. Yes, it can create humanitarian aid, but could it have really created the apartheid movement, anti-apartheid movement, which was partly powered by anger, for instance?
Indignation, yes. Well, let's see, but I think what might save us the big picture of evolution. Because when you speak of selective pressure, there's a new situation at a given time, and then those who are more attuned to that, face that situation, will emerge. It seems that with overpopulation, with facing the environment and everything, I have the sort of gut feeling that there's a selective pressure to bring the super cooperators at the surface. Because if you think of it, it's so much more efficient to solve our difficulties if we cooperate, if we make a worldwide agency on the environment, forget about. So that maybe almost without us noticing that somehow that what will emerge as the solution by the force of the survival of the fittest will be those who cooperate. Maybe. The other thing is I think, and then Daniel Batson is the same, that we always speak of altruism, that's heroic acts, rescuers, but we vastly underestimate the presence of altruism in everyday life. And it's much more, because why we underestimate, and that also shows that actually we think it's the way things should be. Because we don't notice if everyone is sort of more or less fine with each other, don't fight in a room like this. If someone fights, you will speak for 2 weeks. We went to a conference on altruism and those two guys start bashing each other. That would be shocking. But we don't speak that 100 people spend a wonderful time with a sort of good motivation and there's no news.
And you've got this great phrase in your book, the banality of goodness.
Yes.
Which
instance,
really captures that.
If people were really so selfish, suppose you are in the countryside, your car has a puncture, there's a peasant there with another car, and he don't have a jack, and the guy says, oh, no way. You would really be pissed. Why this guy? It's so easy. He could lend me his jack. I'm a foreigner here and all that. If it was true and if you were and everybody's dead selfish, you would not expect. Why should he lend you his jack? So you'll be surprised if you say, wow, imagine I was punctured. This guy lent me his jack. Can't believe. No, if he doesn't, you're really shocked.
But let's go to a tougher situation. Okay, let's think about forthcoming global climate change negotiations. And there are the world's great powers in the room, and they are all trying to put their national self-interest first. And what do we know about, one thing we know about altruism is, yes, it comes naturally to us, particularly now at this moment in time, but we are particularly bad at stepping into the shoes of future generations, caring about future generations. So with that political reality of countries ruling and leaders wanting to make decisions based on their national self-interest, how can we work with altruism? How do we turn them into super cooperators?
It is the ultimate challenge because, again, we have been equipped to react to immediate dangers. That's natural. If I tell you there's a rhinoceros coming full speed from behind the curtains, everybody run away. If I tell you there's a rhinoceros coming in 30 years, you say, so what? Let's see. We'll manage. So that's very powerful. So it's very hard to actually feel in one's gut danger that looks so far, so diffuse, it's so gradual. We'll manage something,
And even more than that, the more facts information we're given about, we just, cognitive dissonance, we turn off.
But still.
Which is a barrier for altruism.
But still now people, this change of culture doesn't happen overnight, but it's sort of, that's what is wonderful about cultural change. It's when it happens, there's also tipping points. A critical mass of people. I think the 300,000 people of the climate march, they were expecting 10,000. I mean, if there would be 1 million people in the street in Paris, love it would be not only for Charlie Hebdo, but also in next November, before the December, Paris 2015, that this will be our kids and grandchildren. This is our planet, enough. Okay, don't mess it up, you, the politician we elected for you. Do something that makes sense. So it takes a lot of courage because those measures are not very popular. If you multiply the price of petrol and all that, if you count the externalities in the cost of the goods you are consuming now,
so doesn't that raise the question of, sorry to interrupt you, I'm just thinking, because we're running out of time.
Yes.
We're kind of already over time, and
Yes.
I'm not quite sure what the rules are here, but I've got a couple of questions, actually. One is, does altruism, is it going to make me happy? Is it possible that I might actually have to suffer a lot in order to do it? For example, well, in all sorts of different possible ways.
So just to finish the next one, if you find any other concept that can reunite the short term of the economy, the mid term of quality of life, and the long term of the environment, please let me know. This is the only concept that works. Now, about this idea that to be altruistic you should suffer, that's such a silly way of going about altruism. No, unless you suffer, it's not really altruistic. Especially if you feel good about it. Oh la la. But that's so stupid. First of all, if you heard that people who are very kind and generous, they speak about this feeling good about it. So you heard that, you don't care a damn about anyone. You say, I heard that, I feel a bit depressed. Maybe I should do something for others. I can't care about this guy, but I'm going to give him something. And you wait for the warm glow. And the warm glow doesn't come. So it doesn't work. Why? Because the warm glow is not about, it's about the actual real, when the moment the altruistic thought is born in your mind, there's something that is so much attuned with something deep within yourself that it feels good. So to ask that you would have to suffer to be altruistic is like asking something that almost impossible. It's asking, may there be a fire, a flame that burns but gives no heat. You cannot dissociate those two things. Pursuit of selfish happiness doesn't work. And then when you are, so there's a twofold accomplishment of others and your own good. But it's given on top of it. It's not that you started, if it's your main motivation, you won't get the warm glow. If you're genuinely altruistic, even it will come, because you have experience, it's okay. But if as a bonus, you grow a crop for feeding the village, you get the straw. Who will work for a whole year just to have the straw? You get for the grain to feed people, that's altruism. On top of that, you get the straw for free. So I think this is the way. This most fulfilling, I think, way of being happens to be when you have these pro-social connections, openness to others. So much better than being nasty, self-centered, grumpy. Even animals run away from you. It's true.
Well, I'd like to put it to the test now, because I actually want to ask you about 17 more questions, and I'm not going to. I'm going to open the questions to the floor, and
there's just one last thing.
Yes.
This notion of sacrifice is very relative. Some people might see that you're doing a sacrifice. In fact, you're so happy to do it. But for them, it looks like, wow, I could not do that. But if you're so happy to do it, where's the sacrifice?
Yeah, no, I'm not feeling it. So, questions from down here, up there, and please wait for a microphone to come to you as well. There's somebody sitting on the floor down the back there. I think we need to have the questions to the microphone because it's being recorded, I imagine. Yeah. So
Okay.
the person sitting down there.
Matthieu Ricard, thank you for this. Maybe a question that would help us in solving. How do you altruistically deal with a psychopath?
Well, like a doctor, it's even worse with dealing, I heard so many times, again, my French philosophers, they are persecuting me all the time. They say, it's too much asking to love your enemy. Nobody is asking you to like your enemy, to like a dictator, and to like a psychopath. But what love means is not just wishing him success in killing grandmothers and stuff like that. loving a psychopath is, can I do anything to cure that person? Can I do anything? What makes a dictator? Is that he has cruelty, his indifference, he has wild ambition, he's so hatred. So if any of those, if I wish that hatred somehow be removed from that person's mind, if I can be instrumental even a little bit by spending 24 hours locked with Saddam Hussein and try to change his mind. When I did the Monk and the Philosopher, the journalists always ask you all kinds of strange questions. They say, who's the person in the world you would like to spend 24 hours? So I didn't find any Hollywood star or something. I said, Saddam Hussein. I said, why? Well, because maybe 24 hours, maybe a little bit of change might happen, who knows? So at least a good service to humanity. So the idea is having the eye of the physician. Now, if you have a very deranged, mad patient, even give a blow to the doctor. The doctor is not going to have a big stick and slam that person. He's going to restrain that person. That's normal. And then see if he can cure or not. If he cannot, just keep on restraining. And if he can, then cure. So that way of looking at things allows you to have compassion and altruistic, because it's not a moral judgment. Compassion goes at every suffering of any kind, wherever it is. And a dictator is a huge cause of suffering for the world, but also somehow for himself. And psychopath is the same way. Psychopath is not a very pleasant state, I guess. So now, just technically on psychopaths, most of intervention don't work. There's one by a person called Campbell in Madison. He's one of the only person who managed to have a successful intervention with young psychopaths who have been murderers and so forth. And it's a very striking result. He does all kinds of things called decompression, rehumanizing the relationship and so forth. But it's very dramatic result, in fact, because he had 200 offenders, teenagers, and after some time they have to be released because their prison sentence expires. And so after his intervention, a similar group with classic intervention of psychopaths that are notorious for not working, a similar group of 100 people committed 18 murders within 5 years. From his group, 0. So there's very small possibility to do something. It's the ultimate test because it's 50% is genetic. It's really something changed in the brain, so the free will about empathy is very restricted. But just to give you another hint, when we did this real-time fMRI with Tanya Singer, she has, she knows the area of empathy, and psychopaths are notorious for not to feel empathy. So with the feedback, you can, and they did a test with psychopaths. It's very difficult to do it on a big scale because it's expensive and so forth. But they send them a feedback, and they try to tell them, please, for once, those who are cooperative a little bit, try to imagine the other person suffering. Just try. And then, they are in the MRI machine. So then something comes in the insula, for instance, a little, you see, and then they say, here you are. That feeling, try to grow. And within a few days, you can see already some progress. So this is not going to be a therapeutic thing. It's too expensive, too complicated. But you see, that shows even it seems so hardened. There's always some potential for some transformation. That's the beauty of training. That's the beauty of brain plasticity. But if you don't do anything, they will be stuck in that state.
A very hopeful response. Another question. Down the front here. You just wait for the, bring the microphone around, please.
It seems to me that one of your strengths and of altruism, that's humor. Now I wonder if you would encounter a difficult personal incident, how can you maintain your humor?
That's for you.
Really?
Making jokes, not me.
It's a bit risky sometimes. No, I'm teasing. I don't know really. I think what is humor when it's not sarcastic? The sarcastic humor is definitely not altruistic. It's very interesting that the Dalai Lama, who is the most unconditionally kind person, he's a very strong sense of humor, and he like teasing, but in such a way. He tells stories, but about people he loves, and everybody loves, including the person. But never heard him make this kind of joke that putting people down. And not only that, but he was in Australia, and a TV presenter made this kind of joke about, sort of deriding somebody, and then he started to laugh, and look at the Dalai Lama, he's not laughing at all. So he thought maybe just the Dalai Lama doesn't approve it. The Dalai Lama just could not get it. The guy said, it's a joke. He said, what's funny about that? He said, they could not get it that putting someone down would be funny. So I think humor, when it's about sort of breaking down to self-importance, just being more human, breaking the ice, as we say, that can help. If I was 24 hours with Saddam Hussein and I managed to make him laugh, that's a good start, I guess, to establish that. And it's very interesting in the Tibetan tradition. Every year we have a sacred dance festival. The monks dance on the monastery's courtyard. It's very beautiful. It's like a meditation in action. Thousands of people come, instead of going to the circus or the movie, they come every year, and especially in Tibet where there's not much distraction, they all come and camp, and it's a big feast for 3 days. But together with these most sacred dances, there's a bunch of clowns. They're always there. And they make fun of the teachers, they make fun of the monks, they imitate them, they tease the public, and everybody is just rolling of laughter. They even have some kind of small drama where they imitate a lama that's completely drunk, that comes and bless people by beating them on the head with a stick. There's all this gross stuff. But they love that. And they send a complete respect and also making fun out of it.
It also just slightly reminds me of, in a slightly different thing, in ancient Greek and ancient Roman thought, there are different varieties of love. So there's, eros, which is passionate love, and agape, which is selfless love. But there's also a kind of love called ludus, which is playful love.
That's right.
A kind of playfulness, a kind of humor, which is part of what creates, human connection.
Who was telling me that? Yes, for instance, in the very egalitarian tribes, there's still some surviving in Africa. And also, when someone was to say, okay, I'm the chief, I'm the boss, everybody, just laughing. You're the boss, give us a break, and that doesn't work,
Another question down the back there? Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Ricard, it is often said that if one behaves in an altruistic way, others in society will take advantage of you. Could you say a little bit about how we should deal with that? How to behave altruistic and not perish in the society?
There's a kind of confusion here between being altruistic and being, I don't know, like a carpet. That it will be because to let people abuse you is not altruistic, really. You are not helping them. You are not helping you. You are not helping anybody. So to tolerate injustice, massacres, bullying, because you say, "Oh, I'm non-violent. I'm not going to do anything to this guy." This is not altruistic. Altruistic has to come with discernment, with wisdom. It has to be an enlightened altruism. What is really good in the long term? Some of my teachers, they were incredibly kind, but for some time they were tricked. Why should they mess with my ego? That's not helping me. Why should they be diplomatic with the ego, for instance, or with pride, or with jealousy? Why should there be? They're just not helping me to get rid of it. Merciless. Total lack of altruism for hatred, for ego, for arrogance, for jealousy. You don't need altruism for that. So, in a way, I think non-violence as altruism can be extremely firm, extremely courageous, like unwavering. If you know what's good for people, it's not being weak, and it's not encouraging other people to abuse you, because that doesn't help anyone. So in that sense, you know, I think if it's altruism with wisdom, you will not fall into that pitfall.
Question right down the back there. By the way, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes left, so we can maybe fit in another couple of questions.
Yes.
Yes, Mr.
Please
Ricard.
also ask Roman if you have anything.
I've got to say, I get asked questions like this too, and you give much better answers than I do, so it's very helpful to hear.
Yes, Mr. Ricard, I think it's wonderful that you're being a promoter of altruism, I think maybe throughout the world, and possibly Mr. Krznaric in his own way as well. I wonder about your promoting or marketing strategy.
In what?
Marketing strategy.
Huh?
How,
Your marketing strategy, promoting strategy.
Oh.
Yeah.
yes.
I have to think about that.
As I saw the presentation today, you obviously seem to couple it with, or to link it with a kind of global apocalypse, which I'm
Global what?
absolutely not
Apocalypse.
denying.
Huh?
A global apocalypse.
Oh, no.
Which I'm not denying. Well, obviously, you talked a lot about global problems that we have, ecological problems, and I'm not denying those. But I do wonder, is that the best way to promote altruism? Another strategy would be, which I think is also your message, that it makes you happy, that it's a source of happiness, of human flourishing. So I do wonder a bit about your marketing strategy, so to speak.
Yeah, so
Yes.
I think, in other words, should you be talking more
Yes.
about hope than about all the problems of the world and fear?
Yeah, I think that you have a good point, because it's well known that, for instance, you don't prevent people from smoking by showing terrible, you know, picture of lungs with cancers and all that. So negative publicity usually doesn't work so well. You need to inspire. And it's quite true that maybe by calling about the possible catastrophe, well, I mean, no, first of all, you're not making it up. And so those things are most likely to happen. But at some point, they need to be, you know, it's like if you've fallen into a situation that is very undesirable. You know, in Tibetan, it's very interesting, the word renunciation, you know, it sounds terrible in English. Who wants to renounce, you know, like giving up ice creams and all that? In Tibetan, it's so much nicer. It's the absolute determination to get out of suffering. You know, I'm enough with this. I want to get out of it. So it's a very strong urge. So I think to know that, because I think altruism is the answer, and it's very pragmatic. It's not utopian, because it's the only way to have more consideration for others that can make us move for future generations. So in order to imagine what will be their plight, I think that's almost indispensable for this perspective taking. Because if you think, as some people might say, oh, we'll find ways, you know, we'll send some particles in the atmosphere that will cool down the system, blah, blah, blah. Now, if 30% of the species have disappeared, that's the fact. And that's happened in 30 years. If you don't say that, why should I do anything? You know, it doesn't look as it's changing so fast, you know, as the atmosphere becoming pink. So you need at least to, okay, you get 200 million climate refugees. What do we do now? It's possible. It's possible. Just a bit of, you know, prevention measures. And I think if you know that you can prevent that, it's a great joy. If you do that, you know, your child is not going to be sick. You know, it's like saying, you know, vaccination is bad marketing because you think of all this terrible sickness that happen to your child if you go to Africa, and then don't go to Africa. You will. But if you vaccinate against yellow fever, poliomyelitis, and maybe the child won't get sick. So, yes, it's true. Marketing is, but at some point. And I think it's, for me, I'm basically think that it's too late to be pessimistic. So it's an optimistic in the sense that I do believe that people, and you can see how it's coming all over the world among economists who are speaking more and more about caring economics, fixing inequalities, those environmentalists who inspire you to show solutions that could be done still now. Let's move to, like Germany wants to be 40% renewable energy by 2030. So all this possible now, we can do it. So it's more to master our energy, because it's not a small thing. Just be aware that it's not a small thing. For great causes, master great energy. If you think everything is going to be fine, then just go for it. You can say, some people say, oh, no problem. We'll put the Club Méditerranée in Siberia. It's too cold, but it will be very nice. It will replace the Côte d'Azur. What's the problem? So you could see like that, but actually there will be immense suffering. So it's good to know so that we start to prevent. But there is a point. The negative advertising is known to be not working for things now. But if you don't take the measure of the challenge, just saying everything will be fine, who will going to move? It's already hard to move people by saying that there's a great danger. So I don't know. If you have any idea, let us know. I mean, really, I'm not teasing.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. And I want to thank Matthieu Ricard for a fantastically energizing, humorous presentation of ideas with humility. And also, if you read his book, Altruism, it is an incredibly inspirational and optimistic book, because it tells us that we are not just self-interested creatures. We are homo altruisticus. We are wired for empathy and altruism and compassion and mutual aid and cooperation. And the hope lies in who we are, what's wired into our DNA. And I think that comes across very clearly in the book. And there is a book signing afterwards, and you can all get a copy. So thank you, Matthieu Ricard.
Thank you, Roman. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to Roman, to Matthieu, to Willemijn and Regine, our partners at Ten Haven. And thank you very much for coming. Books of both authors will be sold at the reception in front, and they can be signed in the garden room where the bar is also open. So I hope to see you there. Enjoy your night.